Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristen, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast. I'm your co-host, Kristen Sock. I'm sitting here with co-host Ron Ward. This week, we are diving into help. I hired a dud. I had a few people say, what does that mean? Consider yourself lucky if you've never hired a dud. I'm sure that we've all purchased fireworks around the 4th of July, and we've had one where the packaging looked great. You bought it, you're excited about what's going to happen, you light it, and it doesn't ignite. And you say to yourself, this must be a dud. Well, the same thing happens as a manager when you hire somebody and they do not perform to your expectations. Ron, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I think this is a great topic. Workplaces are filled with duds, and we're going to talk about a lot of reasons why. But I've hired a dud before, and it just makes everyone miserable. It's so challenging for the managers, and so we got to do a better job of selecting. And we'll talk about some other things you have to do with the dud in a moment. But I think this is a great topic that's going to resonate with a lot of people.
It is. And we start out with ways to avoid hiring a dud because that is equally as important. So the interview process, we're going to focus on that a little bit in the beginning. And then for everyone who's already hired a dud, we are going to give you pointers on how to either coach up or coach out. And again, you are getting perspective from two different worlds. We have myself, who's worked in the private sector, and Ron, who's worked in the public sector. And so things are different. So you're going to get advice from both ends of the spectrum.
Oh gosh, this whole topic from interviewing to termination, I think in all the training I train, throughout the U.S., the number one thing that I get from managers is confrontation and termination. They hate it, and it's like pulling teeth. So as always, we want to be entertaining, but we want to be solution-minded and provide some information that will help our listeners and viewers in their, if they have to deal with this. And unfortunately, if you're going into management, you need to come to terms with the fact that you may have to terminate someone. It is what it is.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I feel like a lot of my peers, when I was, 20 years in banking leadership, a lot of them put a lot of weight on the actual resume itself. And for me, I was the complete opposite. The resume, I basically checked it off like, okay, they completed it. It's not a complete train wreck. There's not misspellings. But I judged 90% of the applicant based on our interactions, either over the phone or interactions in person. And so that, to me, was a way that I was able to avoid hiring a dud on many occasions. And I want to break down a few things that I looked for when it came to my interview process. So initially, I'm watching somebody as they come in the door. Also, let's talk about timeliness. I don't need someone to be 20 minutes early. I mean, that's wonderful if you are, but as long as they're on time, I'm happy. I'm looking for their manners. How do they interact with staff when they come in the door? Do they even acknowledge that other people around them exist? If there's clients, if it's a retail setting, are they holding the door for the elderly or, just all of those factors? I'm watching for this. The other thing I'm really focused on is appearance. And this is something I shouldn't say specifically for women, but men as well. Your hair is equally as important as what you're wearing. Consider it your head suit, because there are too many women, especially now throughout the pandemic, where women are just throwing their hair in messy buns. And I really feel like appearance has gone downhill. That is very important to take the time. Never go to an interview with wet hair. Don't go to work with wet hair. Take the time to actually take care of your head suit. Men, you shouldn't have, hair growing down the back of your neck, right? There's so many things that you need to be aware of. And so that's something that is important, your body language, your eye contact. Do you smile? Are you friendly? Can you articulate during the interview? Are you eager to learn? I want to see a little bit of nervousness. I think a little bit of nervousness is healthy and shows that someone cares. When somebody is overly confident, almost cocky, that to me is a turnoff and a concern that they're not going to feel like they have a lot to learn, like they're already set in their ways. You might disagree with me on that, Ron. Actually, let's stop there. What are your thoughts on when someone appears slightly nervous?
I absolutely agree with you. I remember shortly before I retired, we had someone come in and they were so overconfident that as soon as they left the room, we would always have discussions. And it was agreed upon around the room, this person's just too confident. They think they have it all figured out. But a little bit of nervousness, as long as it's not, incapacitating. I had someone completely fall apart in an interview. Well, I've had people that almost fell apart. They recovered, but it's really challenging to see someone who gets so nervous they can't even speak. They lose their train of thought. I always try to throw them a line, try to help them out, a lifeline to get them back on track. But
Yeah.
you're right, it's a balance there. But someone, if it's a credible position and you really want it, it should be a little bit, I call it eustress, which is the good kind of stress. It's that kind of stress before you go out to a ball game. And I think that's healthy. I agree with you.
Yeah, no, it's true. And some of my best hires have been almost overtly nervous, but I've known them from previous interactions, so I know what they're capable of. But I almost equate sometimes, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, but there are people that get test anxiety. And I put the interview anxiety almost in the same bucket where they could be brilliant, but when it comes to a test, they shut down. Now, you don't want someone that's going to shut down in an interview, especially if they're going to be working with the public or in a team setting. But do you feel that those are one and the same?
Uh, yeah, I mean, certainly they're similar, but I always told myself we can coach people and help them not be as nervous. There's absolute strategies that you can do. I tell an interesting story. It's a humorous story, but it was like a daddy daughter event, and we went to Universal Studios in Florida. And my daughter was terrified of roller coasters. And Kristen, you've known me long enough. You know I probably have the roller coaster personality. I'm a thrill seeker. I'll jump on anything. So she started feeling sorry for me because, some of the other dads are on a roller coaster and I'm over on the teacups. So finally, a lot of the dads were going up to ride this roller coaster. And so my daughter assured me, Dad, go ride one roller coaster. It's okay. Because I didn't want to leave her. And she said, it's fine. I'm going to stand down here with some of these other students. So I start going up this hill to ride this roller coaster. And all of a sudden I heard her go, Dad, and she's crying and she comes running toward me. And I go, what, are you going to ride this? She went, yes. So she cries all the way up. We get in the roller coaster and she looks at me and says, I changed my mind. I said, sweetheart, it's too late. It's too late.
Yeah,
We're
it is.
buckled in. So anyway, this roller coaster takes off and it's an intense one. And I think it was like the rock and roll, something like Aerosmith. So anyway, I'm thinking, my God, I'm going to have to do CPR on my daughter when this stops. It stopped. I get her out. She was like, oh my God, that's the greatest thing I've ever done. So guess what we did the rest of the whole remainder of our time in the park? We rode roller coasters. So I use that as an example that nervous, like you said, nervousness usually means some level of I guess, humbleness, that they're going to be more teachable. And if that's the case, and that's anecdotal, not always, but if that's the case, you can train someone and help them work through nervousness, just like my daughter riding a roller coaster. And again, I would much rather have someone who's a little insecure. Now, I'm not talking about deep insecurity, but a little insecure than the overconfident person that's probably not going to take feedback very well.
Yes, yes. I love that example. It's so true. You want somebody you can mold, not somebody who's already set in their ways and thinks they know more than you do. That's an important one to uncover. What are some good questions that folks could ask to uncover that person who's overly confident and likely unwilling to learn new tricks?
Kristen, out of everything of this episode, I've probably done more research, as you know, on interviewing because I have an online course. I want to plug that. It's called Interview Skills to Land Your Dream Job. I did so much research, and that's the $1 million question. It's just like you said. I remember when I first got promoted, I had someone come in, their resume was just, it was a sparkling document. It was wonderful. Then they come in and they interviewed well. This person actually interviewed well. And for the record, I interviewed over 100 people. I might have seen 3 good, really what I would call great interviews. So this person interviewed really well. It turns out they were a dud. And the reason they were a dud was based on attitude. It's exactly what you said. This person, I did not recognize that this person's overconfident. I was just so relieved to have someone answer the question so effectively.
Right.
And it came down to 2 people, and the one individual was just not confident enough. And we discussed that. And it turns out that's the person we should have hired. Exactly like you said. But I at that time, I'm new in my management. I just wanted somebody to impress me. And this person impressed me, all right. But
Yes.
soon after, then it's like, oh, I don't do it this way. I don't want to do it this way. This is more effective. We need to cut off the purchasing time 3 weeks earlier to give me the time that I need and all that. It was her list of demands. And some of these things were on the fringe that she did. So it wasn't really, with the government, it's very difficult to terminate someone. That's just the reality. So it's those things that just annoy the crap out of you. Can we say that on a podcast?
Yeah,
it just
please.
annoys the crap out of me. And it was frustrating. And it was frustrating for the other managers. Now, who do you think they would come to when they were having a problem? Me.
You,
So
yeah.
they're like,
Your call.
Yeah, it was my call. And your pride gets in the way also as a manager. You try to justify, what you did and all this. But let's go back.
Yeah.
I realized when I was researching that I needed to change the questions. Let's face it, you can rehearse. Tell us about yourself. How do you handle a team environment? Are you a good team player? And people can just practice those things over and over. And so I did some research and developed some questions that were a little more intrusive. Like, how would your colleagues describe you? Or the colleague that dislikes you the most, how would they describe you? Or how would your current supervisor describe your work and describe your attitude? This creates some introspection. And I had one employee who was not very well liked, and that person knew they were not well liked. I asked that question. Their whole demeanor changed. You could tell they were just trying to draw straws, just try to pull something out of thin air and formulate some kind of answer that would make sense. Now, keep in mind, Kristen, this only applies to internal hires. You can use this question, but I'm saying you may not know. Someone may say, oh, my colleagues love me. You don't know that, but you need to make notes of that because we're going to transition into making those reference calls. So I added some questions like that, and it really did make a difference. Now, in my my interview program, they're asking questions like, and this is one, Kristen, I'll ask you. If you were a fruit, what kind would you be and why?
I would
sprung that one on you.
Yeah, lovely. No, I would be a raspberry. And why? Okay.
God, we all want to know why.
Yeah. Well, hey, here's what I like about raspberries, as they are nutritious. They have that perfect amount of sweet, but a little tart to them also. And I like that the seeds have a good amount of fiber.
Oh my
Clearly,
God.
I'm into health.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kristen Sock. That's why I chose her as my co-host.
Now analyze me.
Well, here's the analytical part I found out. Most companies use that just to see if you're quick on your feet and if you can rationalize your answer. They want you to walk through those steps like you did. You said, it's a little bit sweet, a little tart, whatever. that's what they want to know, is that you can be rational, reasonable, and quick on your feet. So
Mhm.
as hard as it is for me to admit, you really did well on that question.
All right. I was just ready to just
I
be
know
raked
that
over the
made
coals.
that made your day. But my daughter,
Now
my
I
oldest
have a
daughter,
really big ego. Thank you so
oh,
much. The ego's growing.
uh, my oldest daughter, this is so hilarious. This is when this first came on the scene. She applied for this really progressive company, and they asked her if she was an animal, what kind would she be? And I had prepped her, but this is before I knew those kind of questions were on the scene. So several years ago. And she and I just laughed so hard. She said, Dad, I couldn't think. And I finally said, I'd be a dolphin. And they asked her why. She said they're really smooth and pretty to look at.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah,
Awkward.
she's gonna kill me for adding this on the podcast, but we definitely got a great laugh
Oh,
about
absolutely. I
that.
have to piggyback, Ron. I want to go baback on something to where you talk about
Okay.
when you interviewed somebody and a decision that you made that wasn't a great hire, right? Because I think it's important that people understand we've been there, we've been through this. I made a few bad hiring decisions, and I remember in particular once I was going out on maternity leave, and I promoted quite a bit, and so I had some attrition because people had been promoted up and out, which is wonderful, but then you still have to fill those spots. So I was in a bit of a hurry to hire replacements because I was going out on maternity leave. So I'd hate to say a rash decision, but I hired two people. I remember these two pivotal spots that were open, and these two people interviewed very well. They were highly recommended. And you know what was interesting? In my gut, I knew that they were not right for the long haul. They might have been great for, I was thinking maternity leave, I'm going to be gone 3 months, right? So they may be this shining star that will perform well, but they're going to be going out and looking for other opportunities very quickly when really I needed more stability. I hired them because they were what made sense at the moment. And I was in a bit of a bind. And they both ended up wanting to move up and get promoted in a very short period of time after 3, 4 months. So I come back from maternity leave and it was a mess. Both of them were looking to be promoted up and out. And so I made a bad decision and I didn't follow my gut instinct because I looked back at the people that interviewed against them and they were like my runner up, and they're both stable and they've been in their positions for
Yeah.
years. And I still, when I see this one gal on LinkedIn and she was my runner up, I still kick myself because she would have been the right person for the role. She just didn't interview as well. And so it is important that we can look at how they interview, but not have that be everything. Like be able to really dissect it and understand really that the shining star, the person that's overtly confident, is not always the right person.
That is so true. We used to always say, excuse me, um, hire attitude, not talent. In my world, it was a federal law enforcement academy. I always said we can teach someone to teach. We may not be able to change their
Yes.
attitude. Um, to keep this going, I want to go back to the person when I said I hired a dud. And I did this several times, the same as you did, because here's the thing. Think about all the pressure you had, I'm sure, and many people have that are listening. And if it's a smaller company, I mean, you are absolutely drowning. You need to hire someone. You've got work, you've got customers, you've got things that are happening. So you have to move quickly. It is what it is. And I do think that pressure causes us sometimes to make the wrong decision. And then we look at the sparkling light and we think, oh, this person's so good. And we justify it. So this is something that I did. I did not have time to do it, but I strongly recommend this. People, as you know, most resumes have either references available upon request or they actually have references. I found that calling those references is important, but you have to ask pointed questions. You don't just ask an open ended question like, was this person a good employee? Or it may just be a friend that doesn't really know their work ethic. So I ask specific questions to the references like, would you hire this person? Would you hire this
Mm,
person again? Did this person ever have a conflict with another employee? How did they handle that? Did this person ever have a conflict with a supervisor? And I, believe it or not, even though some people liked the individual, they were hesitant. I actually had some odd information when I made those phone calls about the person I hired that I considered a dud. Um, it turns out there were some issues, but I could not run it down. I could not find out exactly what happened, but it was enough of a red flag that I should have aborted and went to the next person, but I didn't do
right.
it, Kristen. So I encourage anyone, I get it, there's a lot of pressures, but make those phone calls. See if you can find a way to follow up with those references, because some references, like if you call university, they're just going to tell you the dates that someone worked. They're not
Right.
allowed to give you negative feedback. So you have to try to get references. Now, I was doing some training on this, and someone said to me, well, I called the references, but they didn't really know their work ethic. There is nothing wrong. If you consider this position to be important, there's nothing wrong with calling this individual. You can have second interview, or you can just say, I need some more references. They should be able to provide those, and you make those
Right.
phone calls. Positions, it's not just the position that someone will take, it's how they operate and cooperate with other team members. You could have someone that's a superstar, but they just can't be a part of a team, and that's just as bad. So I strongly recommend the right interview questions and do those reference checks. Follow up.
Yes, yes. Exclamation point on that. You mentioned red flags earlier, and I have a funny story. This is one time that I did listen to my gut. These were very obvious red flags. But basically, I called a gal. I was hiring a bank teller, so entry level position. And so I called her to set up interviews. I had been setting up like probably 10 interviews for this one position. And she had said something like, what time? I was like, I'm looking at 10 o'clock. And she goes, AM or PM? And I'm sitting here thinking, this is a bank. Do you think we're doing 10 PM interviews? And so I was like, oh no, this isn't going to work out. I don't know what kind of lifestyle this gal's got going on to think that a bank is doing 10 PM interviews. But now I've made the call. I've offered the interview. So now I have to go through with it. So she shows up. Looks like she had been doing like an all-nighter in like knee-high leather boots. Hair is just like up, almost like rat nest situation. I'm thinking of clubbing, like clubbing all night and then rolling into the interview at 10 a.m. And a definite no there. But the minute she said AM or PM, I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work out. So you have to listen to those things. Unfortunately, I had to waste my time the next day and interview her, but that was pretty comical.
Let me jump in on just a couple. We always said this is where leadership meets entertainment. If you're confused, listen to this podcast right now. I had one person interview that literally said, I'm not a morning person. Now, keep in
Oh,
mind, the academy started at 7:30. And I mean, you are live. You don't walk in at 7:30. You've got your class set up and you are live. So in an interview, you say, I'm not a morning person. What's that mean? Like, what does that mean? Are you not going to be able to show up? So that was,
yeah.
I at least saw that red flag. And then I had someone to interview. This was the most awkward interview. Well, I had two awkward interviews. I'm sorry. So this is how they would answer questions. You would say, let's say, why do you want this position? Well, I've done something similar and I really enjoyed it. Now we're all sitting there waiting on this person to expound. Nothing,
Yeah.
nada, crickets. So then, like, it was literally a 15-second answer. So I'm kind of looking like, okay. So then I moved to the next question. Same thing. So all the other interviews lasted 45 minutes to an hour. This interview lasted like 7 minutes. And when this person walked out, of course, we made sure they were completely out of earshot. But if you could have just seen the look on the panel, everyone had this shocked look. No one knew what to say. It was really unbelievable. Now, the opposite happened, interviewed someone who went on and on. I had to interrupt them. And then at the end, they literally turned their seat and leaned forward and looked at me right in the eye and said, "Why would you want to hire someone that'll have to call me to get the answer?" And then got even closer to me and said, "Is there any reason you could see not to hire me?" Like wanted me to hire him on the spot. I
That
was so,
is
oh my God,
weird.
I was so uncomfortable. I wanted to say, "Take a breath, mint, and call me later." That's what I wanted to say. But
Oh,
I know
wow. That's a red flag. Oh, wow.
I just said, I really did just say, um, uh, I, I said, "We have more people to interview, and I'll get back with you at the appropriate time." But
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
the interview panel, when this person left, they were once again like, "Oh my God, did that really just happen?"
Oh, that is odd. Talk about interview panel. I used to sit on the oral board for the Portland Police Department. And so it was basically just civilians that would sit in, and we had a rating system. And that was interesting, especially the different opinions on the oral board. Other than that, I've always done interviews where it's just me and my assistant manager. But I have to tell you guys, for those listening, if you've ever had an interview last less than a half an hour, it's not a good sign. If it's less than a half hour, you probably didn't get the job. And if you didn't hear the person interviewing talk very much because you talked over them and through them, you probably didn't get the job. So
Yeah,
just
it's
words of the wise.
recommended. It's recommended that an interview answer generally is about 90 seconds, which is longer than you think. That's a minute and a half. But if you have specific stories, I'll always talk about you want to turn an answer into a story. It's so much better, so much more powerful and rememberable. Uh, but yeah, you're exactly right. There's a balance. Most interviews, now, of course, if you're going to be an astronaut or something, I'm not speaking to that, but most interviews are usually about 45 minutes if it's,
Yeah,
a notable position and you have a lot of
right.
responsibilities.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is, I have on here, I wanted to share with people, like if you are interviewing someone or you're being interviewed, if you can articulate a story, a lot of times that can answer more than one question that your interviewer is going to be asking you. So I've had it to where someone gave me an example, and I'm basically checking off 3 or 4 questions that they hit through this one example. So that is always awesome when that happens for the person interviewing and the person being interviewed, because then it's more of an organic back and forth conversation.
In that program I told you about, my online course, I do an actual example of how to turn a normal answer into a story, and it's very easy to do that. But again, you have people learn in different ways. You have visual learners, audible learners, and kinesthetic. And when you tell a story, you're kind of reaching all 3 learning styles. So you really pull people in with a good story. So I recommend about 1 out of 3 answers should be turned into a story, a short story, but a story. Because as you know, Kristen, if some people are really close on a position, it's not always what you know, it's how you made them feel. How does that interview panel feel about you? And that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we transition into help, I've actually hired a dud. They made it through the interview process. I've hired a dud. I wanted to share a little bit of feedback that I got from my Instagram followers. So I asked Instagram folks who are leaders to share with me what their duds, what characteristics their duds have. And so one, this is new for me. He said, I learned this week what lunchers means. Employees who go to lunch, these are new hires, they go to lunch on their first day and never come back. So apparently that's a thing now. This person says, great on paper, horrible execution. That's what we've been talking about here. Employee achieved 0 production all day. This person saying, duds are the reason they ignore recommendations to hire help. This person is a business owner and he purposely tries to do it all himself because he's hired so many duds in the past. He said he feels confident in his own abilities and does not have confidence in hiring entry-level folks anymore. This person says, my dud is the new manager I've been put under. That happens. We talked about that on the last episode. So I have other examples we can dive into later, but I think we should transition over into, okay, you've hired a dud. They've made it through the interview process, Ron. take on? Let's dive into what do you do now?
Yeah. So first and foremost, you should give everyone a chance. So there's three questions that must be answered, I think, before you take serious action. You need to ask, is this a training issue? Because as I just said, sometimes people learn different ways, and you may need to modify your onboarding process. Maybe that's the reason this person isn't catching on, because they're kinesthetic and they learn with hands-on actions. So once you rectify that, you determine it's not a training issue. Then you ask, is it a cognitive issue? Does this person actually have the mental capacity to figure this out, to perform at a high level that we need, that we require? And then, if it's not that, you want to ask, is this a behavioral issue? And a lot of times that's the case. This is people who do not want to push themselves. They do not buy into the mission of the company. And maybe they're selfish. And we talked a little bit about bringing those childhood behaviors into the workplace. So if it's not a training issue, you've done everything you can. Maybe it is cognitive. Maybe they just can't, they look better on paper than they do in real life, or they just have a bad attitude. There is a time that you have to move to terminate. And that is a very difficult decision. If you're a good person, it's a difficult decision. But in just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some steps that you need to follow. But I've had to do this. And especially if this is someone you've worked alongside, and I've done both. I've terminated someone relatively new, but I've also terminated someone that I knew and had a relationship with. And it's emotionally, physically, it's just draining to have to do that. But if you don't do that, you have to look at all the toxicity that happens as a result of you not taking action. There's people hurting. There's people having to do additional work to cover up for the dud. There's a lot of collateral damage if managers do not take decisive action.
Yeah, there is. And I've let a dud go for too long before. I'll openly admit that. And thankfully, I had a very good rapport with my team, and they felt confident in telling me, okay, this is starting to hurt all of us. I think there's been enough chances given, right? And so that is something that I've learned from. And you want so badly for people to succeed that in certain cases you overlook the obvious, that this is not improving and you do need to move forward. The saying that I like to go by is you're going to coach up or you're going to coach out. And just talking on what you were just saying, it's, have we provided enough training? You really have to start back and go, okay, so if they're not doing well in this area, we're going to provide training in this area. One, they need to know that they're not doing well. Have you communicated that? Have you been clear that there are some clear concerns here on your end as the leader? And if so, then you need to set your clear expectations. And this is where micromanagement comes in. I don't like micromanaging. I don't like being micromanaged. But if you have somebody who is not performing, you have to micromanage them, and until you either see improvement or until you've coached them out. Because that is something where, again, to your point, Ron, you're hurting your entire team. You're going to lose confidence in your leadership abilities from your staff if you don't address it. Now that you've set expectations with the person you're either coaching up or coaching out, you need to go in and inspect what you expect. You can set expectations all day long, but if you don't go and inspect what you expect, it's absolutely pointless. And again, they won't believe you. When you set expectations and you historically have not gone in and followed up, your expectations mean nothing. They're garbage. So you have to have a clear plan and you have to execute on it.
That is really, really good stuff. I think there's a lot of managers listening who probably they feel our pain, and we just have to be decisive. And I think in this post-pandemic, and I think you have some unique stats to share, but in this post-pandemic environment, people are begging people to work, and it's a tough dilemma that I've never seen, and a lot of other people haven't. But if at all possible, you still have to have accountability. You still have to take decisive action. And sometimes the indecisiveness may be the reason you have high turnover. So, if you are a manager, you need to come to the realization that I'm going to be decisive and I'm going to do what's best for the team and for the company. And it is what it is.
Yeah, and I have to piggyback on what you were just saying. And, people wonder, I have been in stores. There is a hiring sign almost everywhere you go. You'll hear from almost every retail outfit that they are short-staffed, that they're having trouble hiring somebody. I see a lot of people scratching their head, but what it really comes down to is policy. And when you have government programs that are making it more attractive for people not to work than to work, that is what is leading to this shortage, especially in retail settings. There is a major shortage. And I also think it's generational. A lot of folks don't want to go in, and Gen Z and even some millennials, they don't want to do the grunt work. They don't want to do this entry level work. But I had to go in and talk policy there, Ron. I can't help myself. That is just something that I see too many people scratching their head when it's so obvious what is happening.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think we've got to change the whole climate. And, when I grew up, my dad worked so hard. He never took sick days. Like taking off or not working was never a consideration for me. But I'm sure if I grew up now, um, I would probably feel the same way. And Kristen will kind of throw a little hint that we're going to head that direction in the next episode and talk about a term called silent quitting, where people are just doing the bare minimum. So we will get to that. Hey, you have a few statistics there on that 22 report. I thought those would be really unique. I found those to really be eye-opening. But I wanted to say one thing before you go to that. I visited recently 2 fast food restaurants. I don't eat fast food ordinarily, but this was
Yeah,
unique
right.
situations. But I walked in one. I've
Taco
got a
Bell?
Big Mac waiting on me. I've got a Big Mac waiting on me. Um, so I walked in one, and it had signs everywhere. Someone came up, poor attitude, and basically said, I'm the only one working, and so forth, so on. I went to another restaurant, and it was, pristine. It was clean. Everyone had good manners. When I left, they even said, "My pleasure." There's you a plug. Um, and I thought, is there really a shortage of workers, or maybe it's a leadership thing? Because that restaurant certainly did not have a shortage, and everyone seemed to be happy, mannerly. So I think this is a very complex issue that we're dealing with. I think everything from, our culture, like you said, the policy, the right managers. We said last week, people leave bosses, not companies. So and if you're listening and you're in leadership, we've got to pull together. We got to get back to honestly what gave us such a strong workforce in the first place, and that's people who want to work. They want to be creative. They understand that this stuff is important and it pays off. So that's my sermon. That's for free, Kristen.
Thank you. Yeah,
You're
no,
welcome.
it's true. And something I failed to mention earlier is when I was a manager, I did not wait for recruiters to do the job of staffing me. I went out and I watched, I observed in retail settings. Of course, I was hiring more retail folks, bankers, tellers, but I observed how they were in their current roles. And by not waiting on recruiters to recruit for you and really do your job, you are able to really, the speed of the leader, the speed of the pack. So if you can recruit your own people and be able to observe them before they're coming into the interview process, so you have that backstory. But going into the 2022 report, this shows that 63% of recruiters say there's a talent shortage, and that's their biggest problem. 76% of hiring managers admit attracting the right candidates is their greatest challenge. 41% of recruiters say entry-level positions are the hardest to fill. And 75% of recruiters have noticed an increase in salary negotiations from candidates. So again, source your own when you can, especially for those entry-level positions that shouldn't be that difficult to fill.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I just can't believe that we are where we are, but we have to look at realities. And I know there's some small businesses that it's very difficult for them to hire and fire. And we get that. And hopefully, as if you stay with us on these podcasts, we'll have some more guidance that will help those businesses. Kristen, you mentioned coach up or coach out, and that's very true. I think our goal should be to coach up. But in the situation where we have to coach out, we always said we would be solution minded, and I hope we've offered some solutions in an entertaining way. But let's move forward. The preface of my book, The Dirty Side of Leadership, is the night before I had to terminate an employee. And especially with the government, there was hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in this person, and it's very difficult. But I'm not going to use that one because this is when you hired a dud. So some people evolve into a dud, but we're talking about that first 12 months. And that's why a lot of at-will companies have that 12-month probationary period so you can move. And you definitely want to take action before someone is tenured if you do have to do that. So the first question, of course, you always ask yourself is, have I done anything I can? And it's good to have an outside perspective. Not that you can share intricate details, but maybe you have another manager or your management team weigh in. Is it time? And if it is, you got to take those steps. So there's something else that I'm going to say that I've never heard on a podcast, and I doubt you ever will. And this is something that a mentor said to me. So brace yourself. If you're driving, pull over beside the road. Sometimes it's good to terminate to send a message throughout the company. Now, I don't mean that you want to scare people. The message you're sending is, we do not tolerate incompetence or bad behavior at this company. And believe it or not, the rumor mill will take off when someone is terminated. And as long as you conduct yourself the right way, and this person's incompetence is probably going to be known, or their behaviors, people actually are going to look up to you. They're going to say, wow, that's a leader that takes action. So I really do. I listen to podcasts all the time, and no one ever says that, but it is true. Sometimes you need to send a message, and that's exactly what that does. But in that case that you have to terminate someone, and this has been something that I've been fortunate enough to help several leaders, and that's both in private and in government and different companies. I've helped them develop a way to terminate someone without it being so painful for everyone involved. So I also did some research on the Harvard Journal, and the information I'm going to give you comes from me. I'm not putting myself with Harvard, but some of the stuff I've done so many times, our information is very similar, except this one. I tell everyone to script out talking points. It's so easy to go off the rails if you're already feeling nervous. You should have talking points that you have rehearsed. When I had to terminate someone, I developed my talking points and I rehearsed in the mirror or wherever, driving my car, so that I could stay on script. You never want to say something that could end up in a hearing or making the company look bad, or allowing someone to get you frustrated and you make some statement out of emotions. That could be devastating for your career and the company. The other thing, you've scripted out talking points. These two are, marry up well, is you don't drag your feet. And Chris, and I think that's what you and I were talking about. And sometimes we drag our feet because we're just so embarrassed that we hired this person. We so want them to turn it around.
Right.
But right now, I guarantee there's leaders listening to us who know they need to take action, but they're prolonging it. And that's not good. And I'm going to come to you on a couple of these, Kristen, but we need to make HR an ally. And you mentioned Michael Scott and The Office. And I thought it was so funny because they had an HR rep, Toby, in The Office. So he represented corporate, which was Michael's enemy. And but I think that's a little misleading sometimes. I think people think they work for HR, but you are the boss. You're the manager. HR is supposed to be a guide for you. So you don't let HR dictate the situation, but you certainly want HR on your team. They need to be an ally, and HR needs to be in the meeting. You need to have someone from HR because
Yes.
there's questions that may come up that you can't answer. And I'm going to do a couple more, and I want to get your input on this. Keep the meeting short. This is no time. Our human nature is we want to grovel. We want to say, we worked together so many wonderful years, but it's come to an end. Or I was so excited when you got hired. This is what I did for you. You want to keep this meeting short. You should have already done all that. You should have told
Yeah.
them the steps you've taken. This is short and sweet. It's painful for everyone. Do get the facts out there and then, end it. Also, I know some leaders who leave once HR takes over. They're telling them, here's your benefits, here's what you have to do, here's your severance. But it is recommended, and I got this from the Harvard Journal, you're much more respected if you stay in the room. Don't take that as your exit. Stay there just in case. They may have a question for you, but also you don't want to look like you're running, like you did something wrong. You did what you had to do. Stay in the room. And the other one is show compassion. It's a very difficult time. It's not time for you to gloat. They're ending their career. Be compassionate and be there. What's your thoughts on that stuff, Kristen?
Yeah, no, they're all very important. I definitely see HR as an ally. I completely agree with that. We talked about CYA in the last episode. You do have to protect yourself, and they will help you have a guide on areas that you need to touch on throughout the conversation. And I agree. I've actually had such a, this sounds crazy, but I've had such a great experience working with HR and having to term people. I had somebody that I had to term. I gave them so many chances and they thanked me. That was a first, but it was a positive experience because I had been incredibly transparent throughout our conversations and coaching sessions and then written warning, final written warning. And it was just all done to where they felt like I truly gave them every chance and it just wasn't working out. But I did it in a way where it wasn't just matter of fact. You could tell that I actually didn't enjoy. It was painful to have to let them go, but it is important to take a breath and realize what the person on the other side of the desk is feeling.
Kristen, I'm so glad that you said that. I had that happen before, and I will tell you something unique. When I was both a state and federal probation officer, there comes a point, it's just like termination. You got to take someone back before the court. Usually you testify against them. And I remember early in my career, I'd worked with this individual. I did everything I could. We called ourselves agents of change. We tried to change behavior. And I did everything I could. This person kept using drugs, and ultimately, I had to go into court. So I remember I was about to leave, and the U.S. Marshal waved to me, and he said, he wants to talk to you. Are you okay with that? I said, yeah, sure. So he walks over, and I'll never forget. He said, Mr. Ward, you did everything you could do for me, and I appreciate it. This is on me, not you. And that really meant a lot to me because I went above and beyond. I took no pleasure. And I will say that about United States probation specifically, we take no pleasure in sending people back. We try to help them improve. And if you're the type of leader that takes pleasure in terminating someone, you need to do some introspection.
Yeah.
Kristen, I wanted to go one more thing because this is a question that comes up a lot. What do you tell staff when you've terminated someone? And
Oh, yeah. That's a good
that is,
question.
it is. I
Okay,
remember
so
after, go ahead.
wait, I'll touch on it because mine is pretty short. I mean, generally your staff already realized that there was a deficit with this individual. And so and you don't need to give them much, in my opinion. You just let them know that they're no longer with the company. And that's how I've always done it. To where it's professional. You don't have to dive in. It's really none of their business. But most times your staff has watched it unravel and unfold before them, and they know exactly why and what took place. But you don't. I really advise against having open conversations into the rationale behind a termination.
That's so good. And Kristen, you're exactly right. Most organizations now, we've got a lot of teleworkers and hybrid work environments now, so maybe the gossip mill is not exactly what it used to be, but there was never a time I can remember someone leaving my office, and even when I walked around before I had time to meet with staff, it was like eerie. It was like this silence. But I thought this was interesting. This is Mark Glickman, and by the way, he does tons of research at Harvard and some pretty interesting stuff. But he actually provided a script. So I want to get your feedback on this, Kristen, before we close. But this is the script, and it marries up well with what you said. As some of you may already know, Diane, that's the name he used, is no longer part of the organization. I cannot go into details because that's confidential information, and I want to ensure Diane's privacy. If you have any suggestions about how to minimize the impact of Diane's absence, let me know. Boom, end of meeting.
That's good. That really is. That really is. I like that. And also, the other part, if you do end up sharing, which you shouldn't, your staff now knows you could do the same when it comes to them. And so you're going to lose trust there as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And like you said, in most circumstances, they know there was a deficit. They know that this was coming. And again, it can actually make the leader more respected because they took action. And wow, that was a lot of information.
It is. We fire hosed everyone with information, but it's very important. Everyone hires, everyone fires. So it's something that we need to be able to talk openly about and have these dirty side of leadership discussions.
It is. So, Kristen, with that, I want to remind our listeners that it helps us a great deal if you subscribe, if you like, and we're hoping that you will share with someone, say, hey, if you enjoyed it, hey, this is some great information on this podcast. And we also have a YouTube version, and we're going on to Rumble and all these different platforms. And we want you to go on this journey with us. We want you to hopefully grow, be entertained, get some information that you need. We always want to hear from you. We're going to continue with our Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, and we would certainly love it. We have some show notes that gives you information on how to get up with us. But man, I'm enjoying this. How are you feeling, Kristen?
I love it. And for those that are going to share, if you feel that a certain portion of the podcast will resonate with somebody, let them know, hey, 20 minutes in or at 21 minutes, this I think is a message you need to hear. So that will really help us out as well.
I love it. I love it. All right. As I always say, be the leader you're meant to be.
Absolutely. Thanks. We'll see you next one.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristen for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.